Hello and welcome to the Alpha Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined by two people today. The first is Dion McCormick, an Alpha developer, who I think you all know from previous sessions, who will be giving our presentation today, as well as Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success, also head of our documentation department. So today, Dion will be giving a presentation, but we'll all be here to answer your questions. And you could type those questions into the GoToWebinar control panel. So let us get started. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon. How you guys doing there?
I'm doing great, man. I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter. So we'll see a different screen here.
Okay.
And away we go. In fact, I see me on
There
Skype.
we go.
Look at that.
There we go. Okay, that should be right. A little lag
Right
time
on.
there. Everything getting set there. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining us this week. We have a fun little presentation on a newer feature. It's actually a follow-up to a presentation I started a couple weeks ago about offline capabilities. So we're going to dive a little deeper into that. But before I get started, a couple quick things. First, make sure if you have any questions, send them to guides@alphasoftware.com. Obviously, during the presentation, you can go to the Q&A section of the GoToWebinar control panel, put your questions in there. We have the smarter people in the room, both Dave and Sarah will be monitoring those and helping me answer those and correcting me when I am going to be wrong. And we want to make sure we answer any of those questions. So they're either questions on my current presentation or other questions that you might have. We'll do our best, and as always, try to follow up to make sure you get the answers you're looking for. Well, maybe not the answer you're looking for, but you're going to get an answer. Let's just put it that way there.
And
So
very
the
often
other
the
is
right
that
one.
guide.
Yeah.
Exactly. The other is that, again, ahead of time, we love to see questions at guides@alphasoftware.com. And in fact, on the loop before we joined here, I noticed that it had there. And that allows us to kind of do a little prep and do a little research and do our homework so we can try to provide you the best information possible in terms of these elements here. The other thing I'd like to go through real quick is, let's go all the way over here, is we have, right there, coming up the opportunity for DevCon. That is, I gotta tell you, is crazy. We're talking, I've got two girls in school, and we're talking like 15 days till they're in summer. It's like, whoa, wait, we just turned the beginning of the year. So it's going incredibly fast. So the DevCon 2022 is scheduled for the 18th to 21st of this year. It will be a virtual event, but a incredibly well thought out, well designed, well researched, and the quality of the presentations are going to be off the charts. We're really excited. Learned a lot from last year, so we've incorporated all of those kind of things we learned. And one of the coolest things about this virtual event is, obviously, it's hard to jump on a plane, run across country, especially with plane prices you've seen these days. So it's a very cost-effective event, and more importantly, the content will be recorded and provided to the attendees. So in case that day you have to have a meeting with your boss or you have something more important to do for a session, you're not going to miss out on those sessions. So again, you can go to alphasoftware.com, DevCon 2022, and register now. It's a great price. It will be going up as we get closer to the event itself. So we just want to make sure that we have everybody there because we love having you in attendance. We get as much out of it as you, I'm sure, and we're excited. We can't wait for that from that standpoint there. So we're going to go through, so that is coming up pretty soon, and let us know what you think. We're tying up a lot of the loose ends on the schedule. We're starting to produce the content that will be part of the DevCon, both the fabulous roadmap from Selwyn, plus new feature displays, plus a whole bunch of deep dives in different elements of it. So get your information in, what you want to see, etc., as we tune up the schedule and put things together. So that's DevCon 2022. Please join us. We'd love to have you with us at that presentation there. So for today, and make sure you put your questions in there. So today, let me jump back over. I'm going to scoot all the way down here. Bear with me. Okay, great. So a couple weeks ago, we kind of did a refresher of offline options. Specifically, how can you provide great experiences for your clients, your users, whoever is developing or whoever's going to use your software. And one of those key elements is the ability for uninterrupted sort of usage of your tool. So there are specific people who have very specific offline requirements. Let's say I'm down in the bottom of a mine shaft. There's not a lot of Wi-Fi there. There's not a lot of satellites, or I'm in some remote location. Although thanks to Starship and, or I guess Elon Musk, that's going to become less of an issue. But who knows if you can even get access to those satellites. So everybody's working to make online connectivity available at all times, and it's getting better and better. But the reality is you can't guarantee it. It's just the world is still too complicated. There's still too many environments. You actually have environments like, for instance, I did a project a while back. It was very interesting. It was with a company that was a contractor on a nuclear power plant. And they have very strict rules in terms of electronics and where they can be operated. So you actually had certain areas of the plant where you technically couldn't have a transceiver on at any time because it was just unsafe. It was not, part of their security protocols was, that way they, it was just, that was the rule. So they had to have that ability to load up data, go into that environment, use that data, update it, monitor, et cetera, then come back out of that environment and then have that reconnect and sync up in there. And obviously Alpha was a perfect solution for that because they were able to build that with very little effort. Alpha did most of the heavy lifting. Now, traditionally, to really guarantee that kind of capability, you really needed to build a mobile app, and Alpha had the capabilities of doing that. But we came up with also Alpha Launch, which was sort of a shell program. And I don't know if you see, Dave, there's other people out there, but they are all following Alpha's path because Alpha knows what they're doing. Anything that's doing mobile, they're really using things like Alpha Launch anymore to try and, sort of mimic what Alpha does. And so that was a really powerful tool. It allowed you to get access to hardware and other things, but in a much easier way than the traditional build a full app there. But we've also found too that a lot of people still want to have that mobile or that offline capability within a web app, meaning they don't want to create an app. They want to have a web solution that's able to do it. And you could do it, but there were certain inherent limitations. And let me go right there. Let me go here. So, it was fast and easy. And again, I'm recovering a little bit, but I'm going to jump into my core subject in a moment. But, you had certain data size limitations. There was less stability. If you closed the browser and reopened it, maybe all of that offline data was not available. And there just, there were certain things that were kind of tough. But technology moves on, the industry moves on, and there's a new technology that's been added to the most modern browsers that we're going to talk about today, and that's called IndexDB. It is a new technology. It's supported by all major browsers, so Chrome, Edge, the ones most people are using. Some of the other browsers can't guarantee, so you'd have to make sure in terms of who you're deploying to that they're going to be using one of these browsers. And there's a list online that shows exactly what's supported. It gives you a larger storage space, more persistent storage. It uses a very simplistic key value pair system, much like JSON and other technologies or NoSQL databases. And we have full support of it in our new UX components, specifically things like the list control and other aspects from there. So it's a really cool capability, and Alpha took the time to incorporate that and really basically what I call harden your offline capabilities when you deploy through a web app. Now, again, as I mentioned, if you really need hardcore, full-blown offline, then you want to go towards building an app because you get access to the file system and there's a whole bunch of other features that are available at that time. But for a lot of people, this is probably a good enough solution for what they're trying to do. And there's also some really cool things in terms of performance improvements by using this technology, because you can essentially, quote unquote, cache more data locally so that you're not having to hit the server as much. So you have less server traffic, you have more responsiveness because everything's kind of happening in the browser. So not only do you have an offline capability, but you can actually improve the performance of your app and behaviors by using this technology. And we'll touch on how you can do that within our presentation today. So the IndexDB is not something that Alpha created. It was an industry standard. And I'm going to jump back over here and I'm going to go to here and I'm going to copy this. This is just a good overview of the technology. I'm going to put it in the chat window. So if you want to read up a little bit more of the background, etc., things like that. And this is Microsoft, so pretty good stuff. Well, actually, it's there. But there's some good descriptions of how this works and all these other pieces from there. So check that out there. And then also there's some really good videos on this also. And again, just note, these are kind of like JavaScript geeky oriented stuff, because it's really, JavaScript is how you interact with the IndexedDB. But this will give you a little bit more in depth of the technology and how you would do it if you were just writing JavaScript. But luckily, you don't have to do that because Alpha does a lot of the work for you. So again, IndexedDB, very, very powerful tool. So what I want to do is spend time today going into a little more detail on how you would use IndexedDB on a simplistic level and then on a more sophisticated level within the Alpha system. So I'm going to pop over and jump into my Alpha system, and I've created a demonstration UX. Be glad to send this to anybody. I'll make sure that it's available after the meeting. So if you do, make sure send us a note at guides@alphasoftware.com, and we'll make sure to get a copy of this from here. So the idea behind this is that first I want to show that before I get into the demo of like some of the lower level stuff, I want to go into a UX here, and I'm going to add a list control, because that's your primary offline tool. And so I'll go connection string, connection, table name. I've got something here called contacts, field list. We'll go select them all, and detail view, yes. And most importantly, disconnected, yes. So we got it. We have our new list control. Now, traditionally, the list control would download and manage JSON offline, and they would use a lot of the existing capabilities within the web browser. But in this update, this is one of the more exciting things, is that if I go to list control and I go to persist list data, local storage has been there a long time, but local storage was that problem child. It had limitations on size. It wasn't very persistent. It wasn't hardened as far as helping your thing. But now, check it out. There is a new feature called indexedDB. Now, file system is, if you're writing this and you're creating a full app, that's awesome because you get access to basically the Flash on a mobile device. But now we can say, hey, you know what? When you bring this data offline, put it in IndexedDB. So why is that important? Well, one, you can bring down a ton more data. You don't have to worry. The limitations are very, I think it's like a gig or something like that. So you can really bring down a huge amount of data into your list control. And the other is stability. It's a much more stable, more persistent set of data. There's no guarantees because you never know what the person's going to do on their local machine. But at the same time, you're going to be a lot farther as far as having a more web-based offline solution with nice, persistent, hardened capabilities there. So in your list control, you can populate it any way you want. You just go to the list properties. As long as persist data storage, you have persist list data where the default will be local storage, which is good for small lists, etc. But you can just drop in here, go to IndexedDB, and voila, you are now using IndexedDB, and it took 0 lines of code. And that kind of is going to permeate the whole system, more and more capabilities. And I'll show you one of those in a few minutes here that allow you to use this IndexedDB technology without having to write code. Now, that said, because Alpha is so flexible, because you're not limited by just what you can do through a user interface, Alpha actually supports a pretty wide range of capabilities. So if you want to write your own little JavaScript things and do stuff. And so I'm going to spend a little bit more time now walking you through some of those, show you how easy it is to use this thing and how powerful it might be in your solution. You know, it kind of takes the place of some things like cookies and other stuff, because think about it, you're persisting specific data locally without having to go to the server. So it can be a very handy tool in terms of giving you those capabilities. So with that, I'm going to jump over here to my IndexDB sample here. And let me just go ahead and demonstrate it. And then I'll come back and kind of dig in to the items from there. That's always, let's be like Covey, let's begin with the end in mind here. So the idea behind it, and you can ignore this, are these items here. So the first thing I want to do is, like, if I don't know where my app is going to go, I mean, it's on the interweb tubes, so you never know where it's going to go. There's a command that allows you to say, hey, does this browser support IndexedDB? So you can kind of make sure your code knows, well, if it doesn't, then you can't use that facility. And again, much less of a problem because many all the companies are going to support it because everybody wants to bring the greatest experience to the end users. So I can click on there and it's basically saying, yes, it is true. Now you'll notice up here, and I don't know if you've ever seen this, but here is I select which browser I'm using in here. In this case, I'm using Chrome. So I'm using, basically Chrome, and I know IndexedDB is going to be available. And most of the people do use Chrome, but it's available in with Edge and some other Firefox, etc. from there. So now let's do a test. Let's go ahead and say, you know what? I want to add something to IndexedDB. So think of IndexedDB as a database that is local in the browser. And the database uses a NoSQL concept, meaning you're not going to have tables and rows and stuff like that. You're going to have what are called key value pairs. So you put into a key a value, and then you can read that key and bring it back. It's very fast. I mean, it is insanely fast how it does all this stuff because it can use local data. It's using a lot of technologies and the core JavaScript libraries, etc. So it's pretty fast. So what I want to do is I've already got a key behind the scenes. So I'm gonna go ahead in here and say, I want to say webinar is cool. So I'm putting a little piece of text here, and then I'm gonna go and I'm gonna say add something. And when I click this button, it's gonna read this control and put it into, voila, local storage. I'm sorry, IndexedDB. Now, nothing exciting happened, but I did do a confirmation. And that's one of the cool things is that inside, and I'll show you, when you do insert something, you can make sure it gets inserted so you don't insert it and then it doesn't, and you later on have a problem. Now, what I want to do here is I want to read something. I'm going to read that same key. There's my data value. Webinar is cool. Okay, not earth-shattering, but pretty cool in terms of what it's doing here. And we also have the ability to say clear something. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that same one. You know what? Let me see if let me did it. Did it do it? Let's read something. Nope, I got to clear the right one. So I'll adjust that code in a moment. But basically you can tell it what key is and say, I want that value deleted or removed from the IndexedDB. I did an adjustment before we got here, so we'll edit that in post. So here is what's really, really neat. So I'm going to add something is cool. Webinar is cool offline. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. Okay, it's added. Now I'm going to read that. There it is. Now watch what's going to happen. I'm going to go out of working preview into design. And that basically shuts down the browser. Now I'm going to restart working preview and go back into the browser because this is all being displayed as a browser. Let's click read something. Well, check it out. It's still there. And that's the neat thing right there, is that when you do this, then the browser has kind of stored it in their environment. So it is persistent. It's available after I maybe leave that web page and I come back, it's going to be available there. And that is truly magic. And I'm using a very small piece of data. I mean, it's just webinars cool. It's not that, but you can store a ton of data in there. I mean, we're taking the list control that could have thousands, tens of thousands of records and be able to store all that JSON into the local storage and have it available. And it's lightning fast. I mean, when I get there, I'm not having to touch the server or anything. My data is available within the system from right there. So pretty neat stuff from that standpoint there. So what I'd like to do next is kind of walk through these, show you how easy the commands are and some of the features there. But that's the heart of this. It's a very easy to use system. It's integrated to our existing controls, things like the list control. And there's a very simple set of little JavaScript commands that allow you to add information to the locals or to the IndexedDB and get them out from there. So before I do that, we just want to do an audio check and also see if there's any preliminary questions. And then I'm going to kind of dive in and show you like all of 8 lines of code. So don't freak out. It's a very short amount of code.
All right, so audio check is perfect. And there is one question, and it just has it's actually kind of an obvious one, which is, how long does this data persist in IndexedDB? Is it like forever if you clear cookies, if you, I don't know.
I have to say, I don't know the exact answer.
Okay.
I haven't researched that, but the specs are in there. It's pretty persistent, but I think, at a certain point size, it may dump it out, the browser may, and I don't know if you say like clear history, does that get rid of IndexedDB? I mean, those are questions I apologize I don't have the answers for, but we can probably try. Well, I'll do a little research and we can kind of
Cool.
recircle back later.
Thanks,
But
Dan.
it's pretty persistent. It's meant to be persistent and to handle a lot of data. Good question. Thank you.
And then the next one is, how does it deal with other users that might be using or storing information on the same machine and browser?
It's going to, it's just a cache. Think of it as a cache for that browser. So if I'm Joe Schmo and I walk in, and I say save something it's going to save it to the same IndexedDB. They don't create IndexedDB for each person kind of scenario. That said, you have key value pairs. So you can say save page at : Joe, or put that in the, and so it allows you, when you create the key value pair, you could like combine the user's name and the item as the key value. So it'd be like, Joe : favorite color. And then when you come in, you say, oh, I know it's Joe, so I'm going to ask for that key. And therefore you could save and use a strategy, but you'd have to manage that yourself in terms of kind of the user of that
makes sense. And I've also noticed that on Windows machines, possibly on Macs as well, you can set up different users of that machine. So if you logged in as Dion rather than Dave, and we opened up our browser, we would have different bookmarks and history and all kinds of things. So
yeah, I wonder if it creates a different index for each
I wonder if it has a different IndexedDB too. I wouldn't be surprised. Really good question.
Yeah, we'll look into that.
We'll take a look. Thank you.
Oh, no, these are great questions. Thank you. Please do so. Okay, so let's go behind and look at a little bit of the code. So the first thing I remember is that I wanted to make sure that IndexedDB is available. So there is a very simple piece of JavaScript that you just insert in there called IDB available open close parenthesis. Now, did I have to learn that? No. Basically what I did is I came in here, I put my little thing here, I said insert UX component method down here. So one of the things I just absolutely adore about Alpha is that there's a ton of documentation for this stuff built into the IDE. So I don't have to go look. I do use the documentation system, which Sarah has done an amazing job putting together for more in-depth stuff. But if I'm just looking for, oh, what's the little code for that? So I go here and I can go in and say, for instance, oh, IDB, here's the IndexedDB thing. So here are all the different sort of JavaScript functions that are available to you in case you want to write JavaScript. And again, this is optional. You don't have to learn this. You don't have to do it. You can use the list control. You can use other controls connected to IndexedDB, but it's available if you want it. So I went in here and I said, oh yeah, ID, that's it. And I just copied the example to the clipboard, closed it, and I hit paste, code done. So it basically calls this function and it says true or false. And then I'm just saying, hey, throw up an alert to say what the value of that. So in my case, when I ran it, it said, oh yeah, IndexedDB is available. So that's a true. So use that built-in functionality within the system. And again, where you get that is insert UX component method, and you can search through it and here are all the different pieces from here. Notice there's also examples and more details over here. So what's really nice is when you start using this, you'll be basically just saying copy example of the clipboard, paste in, make a few tweaks, and you're done. Pretty straightforward there. Okay, so the next thing I did was I added something to IndexedDB. So I wanted to take a field out of the screen that I typed in and put it into IndexedDB so it was available at a later time. So I'm going to open that up. And again, we've got, oh, I lied. I've got probably about 15 lines of code in this whole thing. My apologies. How rude. So what I do is this, and again, to write this, I went to component method, IDB, and found set item, and I copied this example and just tweaked it. Really straightforward. So just to walk you through, so the first thing I'm doing is saying, well, what is the key name? In my case, I'm hard coding that. And that's what I was saying. You could on the fly create this. And there's some great ways to do this. Like for instance, and we haven't done this in a while, but you can take session variables and publish them to the local device or to the UX and reference them here. So you could have like the session variable with the person's favorite color or their information, etc. So all that's available within your JavaScript. So the next thing I'm doing here is I'm getting that value of the field webinar name. So I'm just grabbing that data using this built-in function and putting it in a Dave. Now, here is the core code that actually performs it. So you'll see, and it's a little cryptic just because of the way JavaScript is, but we have a function here that says OK is equal to there, error is there. So what, and I apologize, I didn't mean this to be there, but basically in JavaScript, you can take a function and put it into what's called a variable. So I've got this function here, OK, and I've got another function, and I'm storing those both into these variables. This is the heart of it. So what this one does here, IDB set item, is it takes that key and it takes that data and then it tries to insert that into IndexDB. So it's going to take that data and it's going to open up IndexDB. It's going to say, hey, please save this data as this key name, in this case, IndexDB, although I should have come up with a more original name there. And there it does. Now, the way this works is it says, if it is successful, then I'm going to run this function here. Well, we've stored that function in a variable, so I don't have to write out the whole function in this list. So it's really just a easy way to do it. Nice thing is this will almost always be the same, so you don't have to worry about it. But you may want, like for instance, in my case, when I write it, if it's okay, it's going to just throw up an alert saying it's saved. Or if there's an error, it's just going to show, oh, the data was not saved. You may want to, you can extend this to do a few more things, like maybe reset something on your screen or do something else or set another value. But it's really straightforward. You get the key, the data. These will almost all be the same. And then you just say insert that data under this key and boom. Now your data is in the data store or the IndexDB store, and it's available for you in a persistent fashion on that browser with your application. Now, remember our next one is like, okay, great, you saved it. Now I want to read it. So let's go ahead and read this here. So very similar. It looks almost identical. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it the key. I'm giving it the same exact name of the key. Okay. Now here's my function for OK, which means if everything works okay, do this. And you can see it's a little different. Basically, we're putting up an alert, but also showing what data is brought back from the get item. And then I'm also have something like if something goes wrong, then I say data was not retrieved. So you see, I just say, give me the data from this key, and notice it's going to put it into data, and then it says, okay, if that's true, it's going to run this, it's going to pass in the data that came back, and then in my case, I'm just putting up an alert showing what that information is. You, of course, could say, okay, now I have that piece of data, let me do these other things, like set a field value on the screen, or trigger another function with that data, or do anything like that. And so that's pretty much it. So again, these, I got these directly from here. I went down and didn't, I can't say I'm brilliant or anything. I got the get item in there. There are some other ones I'll come back and talk about, but I just basically copied this and then made it a little different by basically citing the key and then displaying the information there. Now, the third one, which did not work, and I probably know why, is that, my key's wrong. So that's the problem, is that the reason I didn't clear is I need to use this key IndexDB, and I was giving it the wrong key. So it was clearing the key called webinar name, which didn't exist. Now that's okay. It doesn't give me an error. It says, whatever, I'm gonna go try and clear whatever you tell me what to do. It's up to you to get it right. So if I go in here now and say clear, now it has the DB. Same thing, I have an OK function error. I pass it the key. In the OK function, if it clears that key successfully, it's just going to run this and throw alert up. If there's an error, it's going to say there. So as you can see, very redundant because this stuff is really simple. And it's meant to be simple. You can get more complicated with this, but start easy. Don't get crazy. Have fun with it and start doing there. Now, these are pretty simplistic examples. Basically, I'm storing a little piece of data, which often is all you need, and it's better than trying to store it in a cookie that might get cleared, or because there's a lot of policies on cookies. It's a better way to store sort of application data from there. But what I do want to show you is that built into this are some much more sophisticated uses. And these are more for people who have a little bit more coding, want to do a little bit more coding there. But a great example of that is, for instance, get items into array. And let me go ahead and just put that on the screen so you can see it. So you can see that there is basically the key prefix, and what it will do is it will grab everything with that array value. And I'm not going to go into the details on this, but that's pretty handy. Like, instead of storing like 20 different individual items and then combining them into an array, there's a trick where you could write 20 items with the same prefix, AA underscore, and then in one fell swoop, it will pull all those in and put them into a JavaScript array that you can use. And again, this is more for the programmers out there, but it's really nice because then as you get more sophisticated, you're not just storing onesie, twosie things. You could store 100 items, an array of elements or things like that, and then pull them back in and have them available to the user. So it's pretty handy. And as you can see, the pattern is the same. Here's the key prefix. Here's the function. If in this case, it's going to just tell you how long. If it's successful, it's just going to tell you how long that array is. If it fails, it's going to say, I couldn't get the data, and let you know from there. But it's pretty straightforward from there. One other one in here that I want to show, and I won't go into much more detail on it. It's just to know they're available here. As you can see, we have delete item. We have length, so you can get the length of things within it. You can get the keys. So you can say, hey, what are all the keys that are in my my index database? So that's kind of handy when you have code that's kind of self-managing kind of scenario, where you just say, hey, get a set of keys and do stuff with them. But also you can go in and rename a key on the fly. So let's say you're going to version 2 and you don't like the way your keys are named. Well, you could write a little function that goes in and renames all those keys for you when you start the web page, and then go in and be able to use them with those new key names later. So pretty handy there. And then last but not least, you have the do be very careful. It deletes all the data in the IndexedDB database. Now, another thing I don't know, I'd have to find out, is that if I do that, does it, if someone else is using my IndexedDB, like another application, does it clear their values and mine? So that's something I'll have to look into. I was just kind of thinking about that this morning. The other issue too is that I would think about making your keys kind of unique, so that in case someone else, and I'm not sure if the keys are like, I think they're just one big, I'll have to find out. But let's say I put a key and they're called favorite color, and then Joe, the JavaScript programmer with a Wordle app, has that same key and is using IndexedDB. Do they step on each other? So I would just from the get-go, like, put a prefix in your keys, or come up with a naming convention that you know is going to be kind of unique for me. That way you never have to worry about that, but I will research it from there. So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to give you a quick deep dive into those things. I'll take a stop here and answer any questions, but then I want to show another demo to show another way to use IndexedDB, which is really, really powerful, gives you more persistence, but also is less coding. It really relies on Alpha's capabilities. So I'll take a pause here.
Yep, so we are good on questions at the moment. So if you want to just carry on, that would be terrific.
Oh, cool. Look at that. Yeah.
You must have explained everything very well.
Well, yeah, or people are asleep at the wheel, or
No,
there's
that's
something
impossible.
better on
people.
Twitter or something like that. I did see your little note there. Thank you very much. So it does look at my web page. So that's good news. That means that when I clear all, it's only going to clear my my stuff in mine. So that's nice to know. So I guess you don't have to worry about naming your keys so much, but do take time, think through it, and name your keys correctly. So, okay. Well, since there's no questions on there, we are going to move along, and I want to show you another thing. So as I mentioned before, Alpha tries as much as humanly possible to do the heavy lifting, and we do deeply appreciate that from that standpoint there. So what I want to show you here is that there's another, and I kind of spoke about it before, of another tool to be used. So there is something called the client-side data cache. What the client-side data cache was a precursor to sort of, well, no, it wasn't precursor, but it was created because originally the list control was your primary way to pull data and put it locally. Then we realized that people were putting a bunch of list controls on there because they needed to have secondary lists of data that are available, either to display things differently or to have for lookups or pick lists or things like that. So the alpha development team said, well, the problem is a list is a pretty chunky, control, and that's a technical term. So it's built to do a ton of stuff, and all if you want to do is pull some data down, you're not going to edit or anything. You want a simpler way to do that. So they came up with a client-side data cache. And the way the client-side data cache happens is that you go into your UX control, you go to menu and go to client-side data cache there. And then I'm going to click add item. I've already have one in there. I'll come back to that in a moment. And I'm going to call this test just for giggles. Going to go into test. And now I have a different way to pull this data. So I can pull it from a SQL query. I could get a nested SQL query, which is kind of nice. I could get static data. Let's say I just wanted to have a static data that's available on that UX. Or kind of cool, which is XBasic, where it's going to call an XBasic call, grab some data, give it back to you in JSON, and store it. So maybe you want to make an ABI call and grab this data, like the current weather across the United States, and put it into a client-side data cache editor to have it. So I've already created one, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this one here, called contacts. And basically, it's just a list of contacts from my database. So I'm connecting to my database, going to the contacts, and putting my fields that I want to bring down. It writes all that for me, and now I have client-side data cache. And let me go ahead and preview that data, and you can see it basically generates, and all this is in JSON, so then it works really nice in view boxes and other things like that. So this has been in there for a while. This capability has been there, and I've used it many times on different applications and projects, but it handles all that call, grab the data, load it, and make it available to your client-side code and controls. Now, what is unique and different now is that before it would store it in either local storage or file system. So file system, if you were on like a mobile app, that's kind of handy. You had all the benefits there. But if you weren't on local, but look at this. Our good friends who don't know how to spell, no, hey, well, cut that out, is called IndexDB, has now offered to store that data to a IndexDB. So now you get the benefit of size and the benefit of persistence. And that's just by clicking a little drop down and boom. So when I run this and it pulls this data, and when this UX loads up, it'll automatically pull it. Although do know there are JavaScript, built-in alpha JavaScript commands to manage that and pull things at any times. So this is pretty cool. It allows you to do that from that standpoint there. So I'll click OK. Now, the neat thing about that is that, as I mentioned, I have a bunch of, let me go ahead and do something here. Let me go ahead. I did there. I'm sorry. I can't mute my other Skype thing, so bear with me there. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to pause, and I thought that was you, so I'm sorry. Okay, pause. Let me just, because I don't want to disrupt anymore. Very rude of me. Where's Skype? I got way too many things open right now. There it is. You know what's interesting, and this is a Mac thing? I do have do not disturb on, but for some reason, it's not stopping that. So, okay. Cool, let's get rid of it. There. I'm sorry for the interruption, everybody. Go back here. Okay. And let me know when you see my screen. It should be back.
Yep, it's back.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put a button in here. Okay, I'll go test, just show you what this is and open it up here. So what's kind of nice is that in alpha, there's action JavaScript on client-side data cache. And there are a bunch of different things you can do with that. Most things like that, and there's like clear it, refresh controls, etc. So what this allows you to do is that when this UX loads up, it's going to grab that data and bring it down. But if you want to refresh it at any time, you can just add these little commands in there and take control of that fashion, which is really handy and gives you a lot of fine-tuned control. The other thing is you can list files and data. And these are on the file system, so you wouldn't use this, but what it does is it writes little files in the file system that are available. In your case, you're probably going to be IndexDB, and what it's doing there is storing them in keys to store them in the IndexDB. But there's another one that's really, really powerful called refresh controls bound to client-side data items. This is really cool. So let me take it to the next step. So I talked about the first step is you go ahead, go here, and you say, okay, client-side data cache editor. You can create one or more sort of caches of data that's available within your system. And then those are within there. Now, and I apologize, I have something up on my system so this doesn't fully roll, but there are certain controls that can be bound to client-side data cache. So normally controls are choices like, there, but I've got one in here called spin, the spin control. And you've seen that on phones. It's a classic kind of phone device. But if you notice over here, for this spin control, I have 3 methods to do it: static, data series, or client-side data cache. So the values in this control can be populated by a client-side data cache. And that's really, really powerful, meaning that I don't have to write a bunch of JavaScript to take it out of the data cache and write it into the control. The control is aware of that client side. So basically when this spin control, I can go down here and say, okay, I want the client side data cache to be the source of it. It goes, great, thank you very much, but I need a little bit more information. That's what this client side data cache mapping. So I click on there. It asks me the classic, well, what value do you want to display? So I select the item. In this case, I'm going to that context. And I say, maybe I want to put the last name there. And then what I want to do is select and put in what the value is, in this case, the ID. Much like when you do a drop-down box, I'm sure everybody's done this, very simple, but instead of pointing to, say, a SQL database, I'm pointing it to the client-side data cache, because then if I'm not connected to the database, it can still get that information and populate that control. And I click OK. Now, I apologize, there's something up with mine, it's not saving it. I think maybe I have corrupt UX, but those pieces here, so I can't technically demonstrate, which is bad. But what I wanted to show you is that first it loads that information, loads it, and it's going to automatically bind that information to you. But then there's another cool action in action JavaScript, and I'm going to go in here, and what you can do is you can say refresh data items and those contacts. Oh wait, and then you can also wait. This is the one I wanted to show you. You have another one. Where is it? Okay, well, let's add it here. Then I can go here and I can say refresh controls bound to client-side data items. So to go full loop, the UX is going to bring that data down one time at the beginning of the UX when it loads up, and it's going to store that, in my case now, in IndexDB, which is very nice for me. Now, that's the default behavior, but guess what? That doesn't have to be the default behavior. You can actually, you could say, for instance, don't automatically bring the data down. What you can do is on your UX, like on dialog initialize, you can say, is IndexDB available? Yes. Okay. Secondly, is there this key with this data? Yes. Okay. And then you know it's available. And then later on, you can refresh it. And you can refresh it whenever you need to essentially pull it off that back environment and put it into your client-side data cache, and now it's available for all your controls. And anytime you want any of your controls to be kind of refreshed, all you have to do is run this little piece of action JavaScript, and it'll sit there and go, oh, there's a spin control, there's a spin control, there's a spin control. It calls those controls, re-updates them, so on the user interface, it has whatever is currently in the client-side data cache. And as you can see, there's very little coding. The actual setup of the client-side data cache is double-click, and then the actual refresh of all this stuff is done manually from there. And now, since we're connected to IndexDB, you have much more persistent values. So the reason I mentioned maybe you want to do the manual control over that is that you could say, okay, load this UX, and oh yeah, well, I want this UX to load really quickly, so I don't want it to take the time to call back to the server and load this thing up if I don't have it. Maybe it's already in there. So, you may have to worry about, well, is my data out of sync, or is my data, kind of old? Up to you. But you have all these little fine-tuned controls where if you don't want to use them, don't. Just bring them into the client-side data cache, go to your controls that are bound find them, like for here. And then Alpha will automatically, when you load this thing up, grab the data, throw it in the local IndexedDB, connect it to that control, refresh that control, and then it's available all day long to you as you work. And you can be offline and be able to use that data because it's not bound to the server, it's bound to the client-side data clash. I'm sorry, it would have been cool to be able to show that one thing, but for whatever reason, it won't remember my mapping. Must be something up with my current version, so I'll have to check it out. There are other controls that allow you to do this, and there are lists of those, but it's really fun stuff. So IndexedDB, to kind of recover, is a really powerful tool for you. A, it holds a lot of data. 2, it's much more persistent. 3, it's kind of built into our system now, so you don't have to learn a lot of JavaScript, even though I went through some. But if you want to, there's a lot of really cool and fun things you can do with JavaScript from that standpoint, and create those kind of capabilities from there. And you can also use the client-side data cache as sort of a nice way to use the IndexedDB with backend data without having to write any code at all, and have a more persistent, a more solid, a more easy to maintain system for your users. And all of this stuff happens client-side, meaning once it's IndexedDB, you don't have to go back to the server. If anything you're doing with that, it's going to pull it right on there. So it's essentially instantaneous to the user versus having any lag time. So you can really create much more seamless and much more fun interfaces in the situation from there. So that is IndexedDB, and it is a really cool tool. I'm using it more and more. And again, I'm using it more and more because I just tell the list control to use that and I'm done. So it's doing all the work for me. But questions from there?
Don't see any questions. We'll give people a minute or two to enter them in, but thank you very much. I know IndexedDB talked about as early as I think the conference was probably the first time we started to bring it up, but it's really superb how you can take advantage of larger amounts of storage and persistent storage without having to actually build an app or set up a remote database or things like that. So I imagine also for mobile apps, this would be extremely powerful. Not just for desktop web.
It's fun. And it was really easy. I mean, I kind of just poked around a little bit and all the hard work was done for me. I just had to connect it into that.
So here's a question. Is there a tool to make backups of IndexedDB data to a particular device, like an external hard drive or something like that?
Not that I know of. I mean, you could
write an app yourself.
You could probably write a little JavaScript and then download a file of it, in a key value file. Yeah, that'd probably be the way to do it. Is just, and that's what, like for instance, that's the kind of cool thing is that if I go in here and I go to a button and let's just go in here, remember there is that IDB get keys. So you can just basically say, give me a list of keys and then iterate through those keys to grab the data from each of those keys and write it out to a file or write it to something that could be then downloaded as a file. So
interesting. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
So a lot of good just comments coming in basically saying, oh, people can definitely see using this, which I think is terrific. So
good. Cool. Yeah, we want you to have fun with it.
Dion, that was absolutely fantastic. Is there anything else we're gonna break?
That's all I had. Now, just a preview for next week.
All right.
No man is an island. I'm really excited about next week. And just to give you a little hint, so up to now, Alpha's had an incredible support for AWS, and I use that all the time. Specifically things like S3, where you can store gobs and gobs and gobs of data extremely cheap and have them do all the work instead of your server. So what is really cool is that used a concept called storage connection strings. Well, the team's been really working on that hard, and now they support and have, well, I think they've supported for a while, but now it's ready for prime time. But you can support like Dropbox and also things like Google Drive. And what's really exciting about that, which is really fun, is not only can you say, okay, I'm going to take my app stuff and store it on Dropbox, but Dropbox has an enormous amount of cool features like file requests and everything else that you can kind of combine the best of both systems, meaning you could leverage Dropbox to say send a file request, and when that data comes back in Dropbox, you can put it in a certain folder, and then within your app, you can call out and call a folder and grab that data. So there's some really unique things. And by having a much more extensive support for these really very successful systems for Google Drive, Dropbox, etc., you can now quickly, easily integrate those services with Alpha within it. And I'm going to show you some how to do that next week. And again, very straightforward. All the heavy lifting was done. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. It's pretty neat. And again, I'm a Dropbox user. I'm a big Dropbox user of everything. And it's really neat to be able to now use that within the system, within security, or with a secure method on my application. So that's kind of a little hint for next week of what we're going to work on. And I can't wait. It was really fun putting that one together
That is
too.
fantastic. Hey, Dan, thanks very much. And it was such a treat. We get to see you next week as well at our next Wednesday webinar.
Annoying 2 weeks in a while.
This is terrific. Well, arguably this is terrific. I think it's terrific. So.
Everybody else is going, keep your opinions to
yourself. There haven't been many complaints. I will put it that way.
Yeah.
Dion, thanks very much for presenting today. Thank you, Sarah, for being here in the background, answering questions and helping us out. And thanks everyone who showed up today, especially those who asked questions. If you do have more questions, go ahead and send them to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com. Thanks again. We'll see you next Wednesday. Take care and stay well. Bye-bye.